They said he was just another confused old man who'd wandered into the wrong place. They laughed at his worn boots, his weathered hands, his quiet request for a rifle he had no business buying. But when those black Suburbans pulled up an hour later, when that colonel stepped through the door and dropped to one knee, every single person in that gun store realized they'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives. What happened next didn't just destroy careers, it changed souls. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss these powerful stories of justice and redemption. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Stanley's story travels across this great nation. Now let's get into what really happened that August afternoon. They said he was confused. They said he didn't belong there. And for the first 17 minutes inside Aegis Armory, Stanley Grant let them believe it. Helen Morrison didn't look up when the door opened at 2:47 p.m. She was scrolling through her phone, irritated about something her boyfriend had texted, already deciding this Tuesday would be a waste. "Help you," she said to her screen, "looking for a rifle." Now she looked up. Old guy. Really old. Clothes that had seen better decades. What kind? M1 Garand. Helen's eyebrows shot up. She set her phone down hard enough to make a sound. "You want to buy an M1 Garand? If you have one," she laughed. Not a friendly laugh. "Do you know what those cost?" "I'd imagine a fair amount." "Try 3,000 minimum. For a decent one, 4. She let that number sit there, watching his face for the flinch, the embarrassment, the realization that he'd walked into the wrong store. He didn't flinch. "I'd like to see it." Helen's smile went sharp. "Sir, I don't think you understand." "I understand fine." Something in his tone made her pause. Just for a second. Then she recovered, leaning forward on her elbows. "Maybe you should talk to your kids before making a big purchase like this. Do they know you're here? I don't need permission from my children. I'm just saying at your age, at my age, I know what I want." Behind him, near the ammunition shelves, a guy in tactical pants snorted. Couldn't have been more than 25, covered in gear that had never seen anything worse than a range day. "Gramps thinks he's gonna go Rambo." His buddy laughed, shorter guy, Punisher skull on his t-shirt. "Someone check if he needs help finding the nursing home." They didn't bother whispering. Stanley's jaw tightened, just barely. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't watching for it. But someone was watching. Thomas Riker stood in the corner examining a Remington, but his attention had shifted the moment Stanley walked in. 23 years in the Army had taught him to read bodies' postures the way men carried themselves. And everything about this old man screamed training. Real training. The kind you got when missing meant dying. Helen sighed, like Stanley was the biggest inconvenience of her life. "Fine, let me get the keys." She disappeared into the back. "Yo, old-timer," the tactical guy called out, walking closer. "You sure you can even lift an M1? Those things are heavy. Might break a hip." "Brandon, knock it off," Riker said quietly. Brandon ignored him. "Just trying to help, man. Maybe stick to something lighter. Like a cane." His friend howled with laughter. Stanley turned slowly. His eyes met Brandon's, and for just a moment, Brandon's grin faltered. Because those eyes weren't angry or hurt. They were measuring him, calculating. The way you'd look at a problem before deciding how to solve it. "Thank you for your concern," Stanley said quietly. Brandon laughed too loud, trying to cover whatever he'd felt. "Whatever, Gramps." Helen came back with a case, dropping it on the counter like it weighed nothing. She opened it with exaggerated care. The M1 Garand gleamed under the lights. Stanley's hand moved toward it, then stopped. "May I? Can you even?" Helen caught herself. "Fine, carefully." He lifted the rifle. Slow because of age, but smooth because of practice. So much practice that 84 years couldn't erase it. The way he brought it to his shoulder was textbook perfect. His eye found the sight picture immediately. Riker's breath caught. He knew that stance. Had seen it in training manuals and old photos of men who'd learned to shoot when every bullet counted. "Where did you serve?" Riker asked. Stanley lowered the rifle, looking at him for the first time. Long time ago. Korea. Something flickered across Stanley's face. Among other places. Helen was already pulling the rifle back. Look, I'm gonna be honest. I don't think this is a good fit. I can afford it. Oh, it's not about money. Then what's it about? Helen's face hardened. Liability. At your age, if something happened, if you had an accident, I won't. You can't know that. She closed the case with a decisive click. I reserve the right to refuse service to anyone, and I don't feel comfortable selling this to you. The silence was absolute. May I ask why? Stanley's voice stayed level. I already told you. Safety concerns. You're what, 80-85? No offense, but you probably forget where you put your keys half the time. I'm not selling a weapon like this to someone who might hurt themselves. Brandon laughed from his corner. Damn, she's got a point. Show me your permits, Riker said suddenly. Stanley pulled out his wallet. The permits were worn but valid. Concealed carry up to date. Background checks all passed. Helen barely glanced at them. Those don't change my mind. Those are legal permits, Riker said. He's met every requirement. And I'm still saying no. Helen's voice went cold. This is my store. My decision. And frankly, I think he's too old to handle this responsibly. I think he's having some kind of episode trying to relive his glory days or whatever, and I'm not going to be responsible when he shoots his own foot off. I see, Stanley said quietly. He put his wallet away with careful movements. I apologize for wasting your time. He turned toward the door. Hey, Helen called after him, and now there was something cruel in her voice, something that had been building all afternoon and finally found a target. Maybe try a garage sale. Probably find a nice walking stick in your price range. Brandon and his friend burst out laughing. Stanley stopped. His hand was on the door handle. For a long moment he just stood there, and Riker found himself holding his breath, waiting. Then Stanley pushed through the door and was gone. Jesus Christ, Helen, Riker said. Oh, please. You didn't see him. Guy could barely walk straight. His hands were steady. His permits were valid. You humiliated him for no reason. I've been doing this 7 years, Thomas. I know when someone's not right for a weapon. Do you? Helen's eyes flashed. Yeah, I do. Now are you buying that Remington or just wasting my time too? Riker set the rifle down carefully. I need to make a call. He walked outside into the heat. Stanley was halfway across the parking lot heading for an old Ford truck. Riker pulled out his phone, scrolling to a number he hadn't called in months. Riker, you better be dying or getting married. Marcus, I need a favor. This should be good. There's an old man, early 80s. Just got refused service at Aegis Armory. Pretty much humiliated by the manager. Okay, and everything about him says combat vet. The way he moved, handled the rifle, carried himself. When I asked about Korea, I saw something in his face. Pause. What'd he look like? White hair, maybe 5'9" thin. Moved like every step cost him but refused to show it. Name, no but. Riker raised his voice. Sir, excuse me. Stanley turned. Riker jogged over, phone still at his ear. I'm sorry about what happened in there. That wasn't right. He held out his hand. Thomas Riker, Army retired. Stanley's handshake was firm. Stanley Grant. Into the phone, Riker said, Marcus, name's Stanley Grant. The silence stretched so long, Riker thought the call dropped. Then very quietly, say that again. Stanley Grant. Tried to buy. Where are you? Aegis Armory on. Do not let him leave. Do you understand me? Do not let that man leave. The line went dead. Riker stared at his phone, looked at Stanley. Would you mind waiting here a few minutes? I think someone wants to talk to you. Stanley's eyes narrowed. About what? I'm not sure, but I promise it's not trouble. Stanley checked his watch, sighed. 5 minutes. 5 top. Then I need to go. Inside, Helen was ringing up Brandon's purchase. 300 rounds, more accessories. He didn't need another holster. Can't believe that old dude, Brandon was saying. Probably doesn't even remember what war he thinks he fought in. Probably doesn't remember his own name, Helen agreed. The door opened. Riker walked in and his face was different now, angry in the quiet way that made people nervous. "Just so you know," he said, voice carrying across the store, "you just refused service to a war hero. In about 10 minutes, you're going to wish you'd shown him respect." Helen rolled her eyes. "Oh, give me a break. Hero that guy. His name is Stanley Grant." Helen stared. "So, you're about to find out." Outside, Stanley leaned against his truck, checking his watch again. He needed to be at the museum by 4. They were expecting him, expecting the rifle for the Korean War exhibit. The M1 Garand, he'd promised them, the same model he'd carried through Chosin Reservoir, and now he had nothing but an apology. He pulled out his phone. Old flip phone, never saw the point of anything fancier, and started to dial. That's when he heard the sirens. Not close, but getting closer. Riker was standing near the store entrance, watching the road, his posture tense. "What did you do?" Stanley called. "Made a phone call." The sirens got louder, closer. Then 2 black Suburbans with government plates were pulling into the parking lot, followed by a military police cruiser. "What the hell?" Brandon said from inside the store. Helen had frozen change in her hand. "Riker, what did you—" The Suburbans parked in formation. Doors opened. MPs stepped out, taking positions. Then the passenger door of the lead Suburban opened. Colonel James Davies wore his dress uniform like it was part of his skin. Ribbons covered his chest, telling stories of campaigns and conflicts of decisions made under fire. His shoes caught the sun like mirrors. He stood for a moment looking at the gun store, then at Stanley Grant leaning against his Ford truck. His face did something complicated. Relief and reverence and grief for time passing. Then he walked towards Stanley with steady, purposeful steps. Stanley straightened, confused, his hand coming up in an unconscious gesture, not quite a wave, not quite a salute. Colonel Davies stopped 3 feet away. Then slowly, precisely, with decades of ceremony behind it, he came to attention and raised his hand in a perfect salute. "Gunnery Sergeant Stanley Grant," Davies said, his voice carrying across the parking lot through the open door where Helen and Brandon stood frozen. "Medal of Honor recipient, distinguished marksman, chosen reservoir survivor, instructor at the Army Sniper School 1956 to 1963. He held the salute. "It is my profound honor, Gunny." Every MP snapped to attention and saluted. Riker saluted. Brandon's phone was out, recording his hands shaking. Helen couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Stanley Grant, the confused old man she'd mocked, the senile fool she'd refused service to, the walking joke she'd humiliated, stood in the parking lot with his weathered hands trembling as he returned the salute. "At ease, sir," Stanley said quietly. "You're embarrassing me." "With respect, Gunny, you've earned it." Davies lowered his salute but stayed at attention. "We received a call that you'd been refused service here, treated with disrespect." His jaw tightened. "That's unacceptable." "It's fine, just a misunderstanding." "It's not fine." Davies turned to look at the store. His eyes found Helen through the window. "Who's the manager?" Helen's legs felt like water. She made them carry her outside. Brandon followed, his earlier swagger completely gone. "I'm the manager," Helen said. Her voice sounded small. Davies looked at her like something stuck to his shoe. "You refused to sell Gunnery Sergeant Grant a rifle." "I didn't know." "Didn't know what?" "That he was a decorated veteran, that he'd served with distinction." Davies took a step forward, not threatening but filled with authority that made Helen back up. "Or did you just see an old man and decide he wasn't worth your time?" Helen's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The M1 Garand he wanted, Davies' continued voice sharp as a blade, was for a donation to the Korean War Veterans Museum. Gunnery Sergeant Grant was making a personal contribution at his own expense to help young people understand what men like him sacrificed. "I didn't. What you did was humiliate a national hero in front of civilians. You mocked his age, questioned his competence, denied him service based on prejudice." He let that sink in. "Do you understand the gravity?" Stanley stepped forward, hand raised. "Colonel, that's enough. She made a mistake. We all make mistakes. With respect, Gunny, this wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate cruelty. Davies hadn't taken his eyes off Helen. This store has contracts with Fort Hamilton. Sales to our personnel maintenance on our sidearms. About $200,000 annually. He paused. As of now, those contracts are terminated. Helen's face went white. You can't. I absolutely can. He gestured to an MP who stepped forward with a lockbox. How much was the rifle? Sir, that's not... Stanley started. How much? Helen barely whispered. 3,800. Davies nodded. The MP counted out bills, then added more. 5,000. The rifle plus compensation for Gunny's time and trouble. He held out the money. The weapon is yours, Gunny, to do with as you see fit. Stanley took the money slowly, looked at it, at the colonel, at Helen, whose world was collapsing. Thank you, sir, he said quietly. Then he looked at Helen. No anger in his eyes, no triumph, just deep abiding sadness. Ma'am, I want you to understand something. Respect isn't earned by medals or rank. You give it because someone's human. The bag boy at the grocery store, the janitor, the old man at your counter. Every single one deserves basic dignity. Helen's eyes filled with tears, not regret, rage, humiliation, fury that her comfortable superiority had been stripped away. I hope you learn that, Stanley said. I really do. Davies gestured. 2 MPs went inside, returned with the M1 Garand case. They presented it to Stanley with ceremony, with care given to sacred things. Your rifle, gunnery sergeant. Stanley took it. The weight was familiar, even after all these years. I need to get this to the museum. We'll escort you. Full honors. That's not necessary. It absolutely is. Besides, the museum director is my wife's cousin. She'll never forgive me if I don't make sure you arrive safely. Stanley laughed, a sound that eased tension from his shoulders. Well, we can't have that. They walked to the Suburbans together. The MPs treated Stanley like royalty, like someone whose presence elevated them just by proximity. Brandon was still recording. His hands shook as he watched the footage, already seeing the views stacking up. Helen just stood there watching her business, her reputation, her entire future, drive away in military formation behind a beat-up Ford truck, driven by a man she'd called too senile to own a gun. Riker walked over his face, still hard. Want to know why I made that call? Helen couldn't speak. Because I've spent my life serving with people like Stanley Grant. People who gave everything and asked for nothing. People who came home to a country that forgot them, ignored them, treated them like they were invisible. He looked at her with something like pity. And you treated him exactly like that. Like he was nothing. I didn't know, Helen whispered. You should have treated him with respect anyway. Riker walked to his car and drove away. Helen stood in the parking lot as the sun beat down and everything she'd built started to crumble. Brandon posted the video before he left the lot. Within an hour, 10,000 views. Within 3 hours, 100,000. By sunset, Helen Morrison's face was everywhere, attached to words like cruel and heartless. The comments filled with veterans sharing their own stories of being dismissed, ignored, treated as less than human, because they were old or didn't look like what people expected heroes to look like. Stanley Grant drove his Ford through evening traffic, escorted by Suburbans and MPs carrying a rifle purchased not for himself, but as a gift, a teaching tool, a reminder that history lives in objects and the men who carried them. He didn't know about the video. Didn't know his story was spreading like wildfire, igniting conversations about respect and dignity and how we treat our elders. He just knew he had a promise to keep. And he was going to keep it the same way he'd kept every promise, with quiet determination and zero expectation of recognition. Because that's what men like Stanley Grant did. They served, they sacrificed, they gave everything, and they asked for nothing except maybe a little basic human decency. But what Helen Morrison was about to discover in the weeks ahead would make this afternoon look like a gentle warning. Because the internet never forgets, and neither do the people who've spent their lives defending the right to never be forgotten. The real reckoning hadn't even started yet. Resayers Part 2. Lưu ý viết 4.600 to liên kết liên mật với các phần trước trong câu chuyện và hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liên mật khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng, đột ngột không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh tập trung vào hành động cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Viết phần 2 đạt điểm 10/10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh sửa lỗi AI, kể theo ngôi thứ 3 giữ độ kịch tính không Việt lẫn mặn kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang mức document và không mô tả cảnh. Có 60/80 retention hooks vào đúng chỗ. Có 3-4 cảnh hành động khủng hoảng cụ thể ở phần giữa cử 10-12 phút. Có một twist lớn sâu sắc đan xen, mini cliffhanger mạnh. Có retention hooks giữ chân khán giả. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh và chỉ cần viết nội dung nhé. 22. Part 2. The Test of Respect. The video hit 1 million views by midnight. Helen didn't sleep. She sat on her couch in the dark watching her phone light up with notifications that felt like punches. Every refresh brought more comments, more shares, more strangers who now knew her name and hated everything it represented. This woman should be ashamed. Imagine treating a Medal of Honor recipient like garbage. She deserves everything coming to her. Her phone rang. Her mother. Helen let it go to voicemail. Then her sister. Then her ex-boyfriend, who she hadn't spoken to in 2 years, probably calling just to tell her he always knew she was terrible. She was right about that last one. His voicemail confirmed it. At 6 a.m., she gave up pretending she might sleep and drove to the store. Maybe if she got there early, opened up, acted like everything was normal, the world would move on to the next scandal and forget about her. The world had other plans. Someone had spray-painted "Respect Our Vets" across the front window in red letters 3 feet high. The door handle was covered in stickers, American flags, POW MIA symbols, purple hearts. Someone had left a walker chained to the door with a note, "Since you think elderly people need help with everything." Helen's hands shook as she unlocked the door. Inside, her phone was already ringing. The store phone, her cell, both at once. She answered the store line. "Aegis Armory. You should be ashamed of yourself." Click. Her cell. "Hello? I hope you lose everything." Click. Again. Aegis. "My grandfather fought in Korea. He died last year. If anyone had treated him the way you treated that man, I would..." The threat that followed made Helen hang up fast. But what she didn't know yet was that her problems had just started growing teeth. Across town in a small apartment that smelled like coffee and old books, Thomas Riker was making calls. Not angry calls. Strategic ones. "Mark, it's Riker. Yeah, I know it's early. Listen, you still run that veterans advocacy blog? Good. I need you to write something. Not about the video, everyone's covering that. About what happens next." He hung up. Dialed another number. "Sarah, it's Tom. I need to talk to your producer friend at Channel 7. The one who does investigative pieces." Another call. "Jerry, remember that thing you said about owing me? I'm collecting." By 9 a.m., Riker had made 17 calls. He'd activated a network that Helen Morrison didn't know existed, a web of veterans and journalists and advocates who'd been waiting for years to make a point about how this country treated its elderly warriors. Helen had given them the perfect opportunity. But the person who was about to make the biggest impact wasn't in Riker's network at all. Margaret Chen was 72 years old, 4'11", in her walking shoes, and the executive director of the Korean War Veterans Memorial Foundation. She'd been watching the video on repeat since her assistant showed it to her at 7 a.m., and each viewing made her more furious. "Get me Stanley Grant's number," she told her assistant. "We don't have..." "Then find it. Call Fort Hamilton, call the museum, call whoever you need to call. I want to talk to him today." "What are you planning?" Margaret's smile was sharp. "I'm planning to do what nobody seems to teach anymore. I'm planning to show people what respect actually looks like." By the time she got Stanley on the phone at 10:30, she'd already made 6 other calls that were going to change everything. "Mr. Grant, This is Margaret Chen from the KWVMF. I saw what happened to you yesterday. Stanley's voice was tired. Ma'am, I appreciate the call, but I don't want any fuss. The rifle is donated, the matter is settled. The matter is not settled. Not even close. Mr. Grant, do you know how many Korean War veterans are still alive? Fewer every year. 35,000, maybe. Out of the 1.7 million who served. You're a vanishing generation, Mr. Grant, and this woman treated you like you were nothing. She made a mistake. She made a choice. And I'm going to make one too. I want you to be the keynote speaker at our memorial dedication next month. Full ceremony. Media coverage. The works. Silence on the other end. Mr. Grant, I don't do speeches, ma'am. You don't have to give a speech. Just stand there. Let people see you. Let them understand what's being lost every time someone dismisses an elderly veteran as confused or senile or not worth their time. Margaret's voice softened. Please. This isn't about revenge. It's about education. Another long pause. I'll think about it, Stanley said finally. That's all I ask. Margaret hung up, already dialing her next call. Meanwhile, at Aegis Armory, Helen was discovering that losing military contracts was just the beginning. Ms. Morrison, this is David Chen from Patriot Firearms Distribution. Helen recognized the name. They supplied 60% of her inventory. Yes, Mr. Chen. We're terminating our contract effective immediately. Her stomach dropped. What? Why? Because our brand reputation matters. We can't be associated with what happened yesterday. That's not fair. I run a good business. This was one incident. One incident that's been viewed 4 million times. Our phone has been ringing off the hook with people saying they'll never buy our products if we keep supplying you. I'm sorry, but it's a business decision. Click. Helen's phone rang again immediately. Another distributor. Same message. Then her insurance company. Then her credit card processor. By noon, Helen was sitting on the floor of her store, surrounded by ringing phones she'd stopped answering, watching her entire livelihood disintegrate in real time. But she wasn't crying yet. She was still angry, still convinced this was unfair, that she was the victim, that the world had turned against her over nothing. That conviction would last exactly 4 more hours. At 4 p.m., a white news van pulled into the parking lot. Channel 7, the NBC affiliate. A reporter Helen recognized from the evening news stepped out, followed by a cameraman. Helen stood up fast, smoothing her hair, straightening her shirt. This was it. Her chance to tell her side. To explain that she was just trying to be responsible, that anyone would have done the same thing, that this whole situation was blown completely out of proportion. The reporter Jessica, something Helen couldn't remember her last name, walked in with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Helen Morrison. Yes, thank you so much for coming. I've been hoping to... We're doing a piece on veteran treatment in retail establishments. I'd like to ask you a few questions. Of course, absolutely. I want people to understand that I have nothing but respect for veterans. This was just a misunderstanding, a safety concern. So you think Stanley Grant was unsafe? I think at his age certain precautions. He has a Medal of Honor. He was a sniper instructor for the Army. He's never had a weapons violation in his life. What exactly made you think he was unsafe? Helen's smile faltered. I didn't know his background at the time. So you made assumptions based on what his age, his appearance. That's not I was following standard protocol. Your standard protocol involves humiliating elderly customers, mocking them in front of other people, suggesting they're senile. I never said senile. We have witnesses who say otherwise. We also have Brandon Mitchell on record saying you suggested Mr. Grant probably couldn't remember his own name. Would you like to respond to that? Helen's face went red. Brandon said that, not me. But you didn't stop him. You laughed. Multiple witnesses confirm that you laughed. Who are these witnesses? Jessica's smile got sharper. We interviewed Thomas Riker this morning. He gave a very detailed account. We also spoke with 2 other customers who were in the store that day. Want to know what they said about you? Helen's mouth went dry. This is a hit piece. You came here to attack me. I came here to ask questions. You're free to answer them however you want. That's how this works. Jessica nodded to her cameraman. Are we recording? Wait, you're recording now. You agreed to an interview. I agreed to tell my side. Then tell it. Why did you refuse service to a decorated war hero? Helen's mind raced. Everything she wanted to say felt like a trap. If she mentioned his age, she'd sound ageist. If she talked about safety, they'd bring up his qualifications. If she claimed she didn't know, they'd ask why that mattered. I made a judgment call, she said finally, based on the information I had at the time, if I had known his background. So veterans should have to prove their service before receiving basic respect. That's not what I said. Then what are you saying? I'm saying this has been blown completely out of proportion. One decision, one moment, and my entire life is being destroyed. Is that fair? Is that justice? Jessica tilted her head. Stanley Grant spent 2 years in frozen trenches watching his friends die. He came home to a country that barely acknowledged Korea even happened. He's spent 60 years being quiet and humble and asking for nothing. Yesterday he tried to buy a rifle to donate to a museum so young people could learn about his war, and you mocked him. She paused. Tell me again about what's fair. Helen had no answer. The interview aired at 6 o'clock. By 7, the video had another 2 million views, but the real twist was still coming. At 8 p.m., Helen's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Ms. Morrison. Who is this? My name is Robert Grant. I'm Stanley Grant's son. Helen's blood went cold. I didn't know he had family. Didn't know he had people who love him. Didn't know he was a real person with a real life. Robert's voice was quiet, controlled, which somehow made it worse. I'm calling to tell you something. My father asked me not to. He said you'd been punished enough that we should let it go. But I can't. I'm sorry. I truly am. If I could take it back. You can't. And sorry doesn't mean anything when you're only saying it because you got caught. You know what my father did last night. Helen didn't answer. He called me. Asked if I was embarrassed to be his son. Because of how he looked in that store, how old he seemed, how people laughed at him. An 84-year-old man who saved lives, who served his country, who raised 3 kids and never asked for anything, called me crying because you made him feel worthless. I never meant, yes, you did. You meant every word, every laugh, every dismissive look. You meant it all. And now you're suffering consequences and you think that's unfair. Want to know what's unfair? Helen was crying now. Not performing for cameras, not trying to garner sympathy, actually crying. My father has nightmares, Robert continued. Still, after 60 years, he wakes up thinking he's back in Korea, back in the cold, watching men freeze to death. And yesterday you made him feel that same helplessness, that same worthlessness, that same sense that his life didn't matter. Please, Helen whispered. Please, I understand. I know I was wrong. Do you? Because here's what I think. I think you're sorry you got caught. Sorry your business is failing. Sorry people are angry, but I don't think you understand what you actually did. Not yet. Then tell me what to do. Tell me how to make this right. Robert was quiet for a long moment. I can't tell you that. That's something you have to figure out yourself. But I'll tell you this, my father is a better person than you or I will ever be. Because even after everything, he still said you deserved forgiveness. He still said you were just human, making human mistakes. He said that he did, even though you don't deserve it, even though you wouldn't have shown him that same grace. Robert's voice got harder. So here's my question, Ms. Morrison. What are you going to do with that forgiveness? Are you going to accept it, like you accept everything else as something you're owed, or are you going to actually change? The line went dead. Helen sat alone in her dark store phone in her lap, surrounded by the wreckage of her reputation and her business, and her comfortable certainty that she was a good person who'd just had bad luck. And for the first time since the video went viral, she started to understand what she'd actually done. Not because of the media, not because of the lost contracts, not because strangers hated her, but because a man she'd humiliated had cried, had questioned his own worth, had been reduced to wondering if his own son was embarrassed by him. She'd done that. She had looked at a human being and decided he was less than, not because of anything he'd done, but because of what he looked like, how old he was, how he didn't fit her image of who deserved respect. Helen put her head in her hands and finally truly cried. But crying wasn't going to fix anything. And what she didn't know yet was that the internet's memory was longer and more creative than she could possibly imagine. The next morning, she woke up to find that someone had created a website. NotWelcomeHere.com. It listed every business that had cut ties with Aegis Armory with a running tally of the financial impact. Current total, $1.7 million in lost contracts and partnerships. There was also a petition. Revoke Helen Morrison's FFL license. 50,000 signatures overnight. And a GoFundMe. But not for her. For Stanley Grant to fund more museum donations, more educational programs about the Korean War. It had raised $200,000 in 18 hours. Helen read through it all feeling like she was drowning in cold water. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered anyway. Hello. Ms. Morrison, this is Margaret Chen from the Korean War Veterans Memorial Foundation. I believe we need to talk. Helen's heart hammered. About what? About what happens next. Because this can go one of two ways. Either you become the villain of this story permanently, or you become part of the solution. What do you mean? Margaret's voice was crisp, businesslike, without sympathy, but also without cruelty. I'm organizing an event next month. A memorial dedication. Stanley Grant will be there. So will 50 other Korean War veterans. Media coverage, speeches, the works. And I want you there too. Why would I? Because you're going to apologize. Publicly. In front of cameras and veterans and everyone who's been watching this unfold. A real apology, not a PR statement. You're going to look those men in the eye and tell them they matter. Helen's throat closed. I can't do that. Yes, you can, and you will. Because right now, you represent everything wrong with how we treat our veterans. But you could represent something else. You could represent change, learning, growth. You could show people what real accountability looks like. And if I refuse, then you stay the villain. Forever. Every time someone searches your name, this is what they'll find. Every job application, every relationship, every fresh start you try to make, this will follow you. Because the internet doesn't forget Ms. Morrison. Ever. Margaret paused. But if you do this, if you actually show up and face what you did, maybe you get a chance at redemption. Will he forgive me, Stanley? That's not for me to decide. But I know him. And I know that if you show real remorse, real understanding, real change, he'll at least listen. That's more than most people would give you. Helen closed her eyes, tried to imagine standing in front of cameras, in front of veterans, in front of Stanley Grant himself, and saying the words that needed to be said. The thought terrified her more than anything in her life, which meant it was probably exactly what she needed to do. When is it? She asked quietly. 4 weeks. October 15th. I'll send you the details. Okay, Helen whispered. Okay, I'll be there. She hung up and sat in the silence of her failing store, surrounded by phones that had stopped ringing only because she'd unplugged them, and wondered if 4 weeks was enough time to figure out how to become someone worth forgiving. But what nobody had told her yet was that showing up would be the easy part. What came after that was going to require something she'd never had to give before. Actual humility, actual change, actual proof that people could be more than their worst moments. And Helen Morrison, whether she knew it or not, was about to find out if she had that kind of strength. Réessayer, T.S. Part 3. Louis, Viet 4900, 6200, 2 Liên Kết Liên Mạch, với các phần trục trong câu chuyện phá hội thoại, tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới.
liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần, duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề, phụ phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh, tập trung vào hành động, cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Viết phần 2 đạt điểm 10/10/10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh, sửa lỗi AI, kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ độ kịch tính, không viết lan man, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang mực document và không mô tả cảnh. Có 60-80 retention hooks vào đúng chỗ. Có 3-4 cảnh hành động, khủng hoảng cụ thể ở phần giữa cứ 10-12 phút. Có một twist lớn sâu sắc đan xen mini cliffhanger mạnh. Có retention hooks giữ chân khán giả. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh và chỉ cần viết nội dung nhé. Part 3. The salute heard around the store. The 4 weeks Helen had to prepare felt like 4 minutes and 4 years at the same time. She closed Aegis Armory on September 18th. Not temporarily, permanently. The banks had called in her loans. Her distributors were gone, and the landlord wanted her out before she damaged his property's reputation any further. She sold what inventory remained to a buyer in Nevada who paid 30 cents on the dollar and didn't ask questions. On September 20th, she moved into a studio apartment that smelled like cigarettes and regret. Her savings would last maybe 3 months if she was careful. After that, she had no idea. On September 23rd, she started applying for jobs. Retail manager positions, sales associate roles, anything that matched her experience. She got exactly 0 callbacks. When she finally reached someone on the phone, a hiring manager at a sporting goods store who at least had the decency to be honest, the woman said, "Look, I'm sorry, but your name pulls up that video. Corporate would never approve it. You're radioactive." Radioactive. That was the word everyone kept using. On September 30th, Helen did something she hadn't done in 15 years. She went to her mother's house and knocked on the door. Her mother answered, looking older than Helen remembered. "Helen?" "Hi, Mom." They stood there in the doorway, years of complicated history between them. Her mother had never approved of Helen's ambition, her drive, her need to prove she didn't need anyone. "I always told you pride comes before a fall," her mother used to say. Helen had always hated that saying. Now she understood it. "Can I come in?" Helen asked. Her mother stepped aside without a word. They sat in the kitchen where Helen had grown up drinking coffee that was too strong the way her mother had always made it. Neither spoke for a long time. "I saw the video," her mother said finally. "Everyone saw the video. That man, Stanley Grant. He reminded me of your grandfather." Helen's hands tightened around her mug. She'd forgotten that. Her grandfather, her mother's father, who'd served in Vietnam, who'd come home to protesters and shame, and had never talked about the war except once when Helen was 12, and she'd asked him if he'd killed anyone. He'd looked at her with eyes that were suddenly somewhere else, and said, "I did what I had to do. Don't ever ask me again." She never had. He died when she was 16. Heart attack sudden at a grocery store. He'd been reaching for a can of soup on the top shelf when his heart just stopped. "Grandpa wouldn't have gone into a gun store," Helen said quietly. "No. But if he had, and someone had treated him the way you treated that man." Her mother's voice cracked. "I think it would have killed him all over again. That feeling of being nothing, of not mattering." "I know, Mom. Do you? Because I've been watching you on the news, reading your statements, and I don't hear someone who understands. I hear someone who's sorry they got caught." Helen felt anger flash hot in her chest. "That's not fair. I've lost everything. My business, my reputation, my entire life. And that man lost his dignity. Which one matters more?" The anger died as fast as it came. Helen put her face in her hands. "I don't know how to fix this." "Then maybe you can't. Maybe all you can do is stand up and say you were wrong and mean it. Really mean it. Not because you want people to forgive you, but because it's true. Margaret Chen wants me to apologize at the memorial dedication, in front of everyone." Her mother nodded slowly. "Are you going to do it?" "I said I would." "That's not what I asked. Are you going to do it? Really do it? Or are you going to show up and say words you think people want to hear?"
Helen looked at her mother. This woman who'd raised her alone after Helen's father left, who'd worked 2 jobs to keep them fed, who'd never asked for anything but basic decency from her daughter, and usually didn't get even that. "I don't know," Helen said honestly. "I don't know who I am anymore." "Then figure it out before October 15th, because if you stand up there and lie, even a good lie, those men will know. Veterans always know." Helen drove back to her apartment that night thinking about her grandfather, trying to remember more about him, more conversations, more moments. But there weren't many. He'd been quiet, present, but distant, like part of him had never left the jungle. She wondered if Stanley Grant was like that, if part of him was still in Korea, still in the cold, still watching friends die. She wondered if her actions had dragged him back there. The thought made her physically ill. October 15th arrived faster than Helen was ready for. She stood in her apartment at 6 a.m., staring at the clothes laid out on her bed. Margaret had been specific business attire, respectful, nothing flashy. Helen had chosen a simple navy dress and black flats. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a stranger. Her phone buzzed. Text from Margaret. "Car will pick you up at 8, don't be late. And Helen, be ready. This won't be easy." Helen texted back, "I know." But she didn't know. Not really. The memorial dedication was being held at the Korean War Veterans Memorial in the city, a place Helen had driven past 100 times and never once stopped to visit. The car, a town car Margaret had sent, pulled up at 8:52 a.m. Helen got in. The driver, an older man with salt and pepper hair, glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You're the woman from the video," he said. Not a question. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "My father was at Chosen. Came home with frostbite so bad they took 3 toes. Never complained once." He met her eyes in the mirror. "What you did to that man was wrong." "I know. Knowing and understanding are different things. I'm trying to understand." "Try harder." He pulled into traffic. They drove in silence. Helen watched the city pass by, people going about their lives, completely unaware that hers was about to either end or begin, depending on the next few hours. The memorial came into view at 9:30. There were already cars everywhere, news vans, a stage set up with sound equipment, American flags and Korean flags flying side by side. And people. So many people. Helen's stomach turned to ice. "I can't do this," she whispered. The driver pulled up to the designated area. "Yes, you can, because if you don't, you're exactly who everyone thinks you are." He was right. Helen got out of the car on legs that felt like water. Margaret Chen appeared immediately, clipboard in hand, wearing a sharp pantsuit and an expression that gave nothing away. "You came. I said I would. A lot of people say things. Follow me. We need to go over the program." Margaret walked fast, talking as she moved. "Ceremony starts at 10. Opening remarks, color guard, national anthem. Then I speak. Then 3 veterans share their stories. Then you. Then me. Then you apologize. 3 to 5 minutes. Then Stanley speaks if he wants to. Then we dedicate the memorial." Questions. Helen had about 1,000 questions, but her throat was too tight to ask any of them. They reached a tent behind the stage. Inside were 15 or 20 elderly men in suits, some in wheelchairs, some using canes, all wearing medals and ribbons, and the bearing of men who'd seen things no one should have to see. The conversation stopped when Helen walked in. The silence was deafening. "Gentlemen," Margaret said, her voice cutting through the tension. "This is Helen Morrison. She's here to apologize. If any of you want to leave while she speaks, I'll understand. But I'm asking you to stay, to listen, because that's what we do. We listen even when it's hard." No one moved. Margaret gestured to Helen. "They're all yours." Then she walked out, leaving Helen alone with 15 Korean War veterans who had every reason to hate her. Helen stood there, hands shaking, mouth dry. One of the men, thin and gray with eyes that seemed to look right through her, spoke first. "You the one who humiliated Stanley Grant?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" The question was simple. The answer wasn't. "Because I thought I was better than him," Helen said, and was shocked to hear the words come out of her mouth. Not the prepared answer she'd rehearsed. The truth. The man nodded slowly. At least you're honest. That's something. Another veteran, this one in a wheelchair, rolled forward slightly. My name is James Park. I was at Porkchop Hill. Watched my best friend die in my arms. He was 19. His voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. Came home and couldn't get a job because I was too damaged, too broken. Took me 10 years before someone finally hired me. You know what that feels like, being told you're not good enough. I'm starting to, Helen whispered. Good. Because that's what you did to Stanley. You looked at him and decided he wasn't good enough. Didn't matter what he'd done, what he'd survived, what he'd given. You saw an old man, and that was all. I was wrong. Being wrong is easy. Being different is hard. James Park wheeled back. Show us you're different. A third veteran stood up taller than the others, with a scar running down the side of his face. You know why we're all here today, Ms. Morrison? Helen shook her head. Because we're dying. All of us. 35,000 left, maybe less. In 10 years, there won't be any. In 20, Korea will be something kids read about in textbooks and forget by lunch. We're trying to make sure people remember. That what we did, what we lost, what we left over there, it meant something. His voice got harder. And you made one of us feel like it didn't. Like he didn't. I can't change what I did, Helen said. I can only try to do better. Then do better, starting now. The ceremony began at exactly 10 a.m. Helen stood backstage watching through a gap in the curtain as hundreds of people filled the space. Camera crews set up reporters, did sound checks, and in the front row, in a seat of honor, sat Stanley Grant. Helen's breath caught. She hadn't seen him since that day in the store. He looked smaller, somehow older, but he sat with his back straight and his eyes forward. Next to him sat a younger man, 50s maybe, who had to be his son Robert. The one who'd called her, made her cry, made her understand. The color guard marched in. Everyone stood for the national anthem. Helen stood too, her hand over her heart, and for the first time in years, actually thought about what the words meant. Margaret spoke first. Her voice carried across the crowd, clear and strong. We gather here today to honor the forgotten. The men who fought in a war we called a conflict, who came home to parades for others and silence for themselves. But they are not forgotten. Not by us. Not anymore. The crowd applauded. Then the veterans spoke. One by one, 3 men who'd been at Chosin, at Porkchop Hill, at places with names Helen didn't recognize, but that clearly carried weight for everyone who did. They spoke about cold and fear and losing friends and somehow surviving. They spoke without self-pity, without asking for praise, just stating facts about what happened and what they saw. By the third veteran half, the crowd was crying. Then Margaret returned to the microphone. Before we hear from Gunnery Sergeant Grant, we have someone else who needs to speak. Someone who made a mistake, a serious mistake. Someone who represents what happens when we forget to see the humanity in our veterans. Helen Morrison has asked to address you today. The crowd murmured, some angry, some curious, some confused. Margaret looked backstage. Helen. This was it. Helen walked out onto the stage. The sun was bright, the crowd was massive, and every single eye was on her. She reached the microphone. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to grip the podium to steady them. My name is Helen Morrison, she began, and her voice cracked immediately. She cleared her throat. Tried again. 3 weeks ago, I refused to sell a rifle to Stanley Grant. I mocked him, belittled him, and humiliated him in front of strangers. I did this because I looked at him and saw only an old man, someone I deemed not worth my time or respect. The crowd was silent. I didn't know he was a Medal of Honor recipient. I didn't know he'd survived Chosin Reservoir. I didn't know he was a sniper instructor or that he was buying the rifle for a museum donation. But here's the truth, it shouldn't have mattered. I should have treated him with respect regardless, because respect isn't earned by medals. It's given because someone is human. Helen looked at Stanley. He was watching her, his face unreadable. Mr. Grant, I can't change what I did. I can't give you back your dignity or erase the humiliation or undo the pain I caused. but I can tell you that I was wrong. Completely, absolutely wrong. And I can tell you that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I said. I'm sorry for what I did. And I'm sorry for what I represent a society that has forgotten how to honor its veterans while they're still alive. Her voice broke completely. She didn't try to hide it. My grandfather served in Vietnam. I barely knew him. He was quiet, distant, and I never thought to ask why, never thought to thank him, never thought to tell him he mattered. He died when I was 16, and I realized standing here today that I never once told him I was proud to be his granddaughter. Tears were streaming down her face now. I can't tell him, but I can tell all of you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry we haven't done better. I'm sorry I didn't do better. And I promise. Her voice shook. I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be better. She stepped back from the microphone. The silence stretched out endless and crushing. Then Stanley Grant stood up. Slowly, carefully using his cane for support, he walked toward the stage. Robert tried to help him, but Stanley waved him off. This was something he needed to do himself. He climbed the stairs one at a time. Margaret offered her hand, but he shook his head. He made it to the top, breathing hard, and walked to where Helen stood. They looked at each other. Helen couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could barely see through her tears. Stanley reached out his hand, not to strike, not to push her away, to shake. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice not amplified by the microphone, but carrying anyway in the absolute silence. "Thank you for being honest." Helen took his hand. It was warm, weathered, strong, despite his age. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she whispered. "Nobody deserves forgiveness," Stanley said. "That's why it's called grace." And then, in front of hundreds of people, cameras, reporters, and veterans who'd earned the right to judge, Stanley Grant pulled Helen Morrison into a brief, gentle hug. The crowd erupted, some in applause, some in tears, some in shocked silence that slowly transformed into something else. Something like hope that maybe, just maybe, people could be more than their worst moments. Stanley released her and walked to the microphone. Margaret adjusted it for his height. "My name is Stanley Grant," he said, his voice steady now, carried by decades of practice, speaking to soldiers who needed to hear what he had to say. "I'm 84 years old. I've outlived most of my friends. I've survived things I hope none of you ever have to see, and 3 weeks ago a woman made me feel worthless." The crowd went silent again. But she's not the villain. We are. All of us. Every time we walk past a homeless veteran, every time we ignore an elderly person asking for help, every time we decide someone isn't worth our attention because they don't look important. He paused. Ms. Morrison did something wrong, but she also did something brave. She stood up here and admitted it. How many of us can say we do the same? He turned to look at Helen. "You asked for forgiveness. I give it freely. Not because you earned it, but because we're all human. We all make mistakes. The question is what we do after." Stanley looked back at the crowd. "I didn't fight in Korea so we could be a country that tears each other apart. I fought so we could be better. So we could choose grace over judgment. So we could choose understanding over hatred. If an old man and the woman who humiliated him can find common ground, so can everyone else." The applause started slow, then built like a wave. Stanley stepped back from the microphone. Margaret came forward, tears in her eyes, and said something about dedication and memory and honor, but Helen barely heard it. She was watching Stanley walk carefully down the stage stairs, Robert at his side, now supporting him without making it obvious. She watched as other veterans stood, those who could, and saluted. Not ironically, not angrily, but with genuine respect for a man who'd given everything and asked for nothing. After the ceremony, after the crowds dispersed and the cameras packed up and the reporters got their sound bites, Helen found herself standing alone near the memorial itself. She read the names carved into stone. Thousands of them. Men who'd never come home. Overwhelming, isn't it? She turned. Thomas Riker stood there, hands in his pockets. "I never knew there were so many," Helen said. "Most people don't. That's why places like this matter." He walked closer, looking at the names. "I'm the one who made the call. That day at your store. I'm the reason everything happened. I'm the reason everything happened. Fair enough, but I called in the cavalry. He glanced at her. You did good today. I meant what I said. I know, that's why it worked. They stood in silence for a moment. What happens now? Helen asked. For you, I don't know. You can't get your store back. Your reputation is still trashed. Job prospects are probably nil. He turned to face her fully. But you're alive. You're capable. And you just stood in front of hundreds of people and admitted you were wrong. That takes guts. Or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. Riker pulled a business card from his pocket. This is a friend of mine. Runs a nonprofit for veteran services. They need someone good with inventory logistics retail experience. Pay is terrible. Work is hard. But it's meaningful. Helen took the card. Why would you help me? Because Stanley asked me to. Said everyone deserves a chance to do better. Riker smiled slightly. Turns out grace is contagious. He walked away, leaving Helen alone with the names of the fallen and the weight of second chances. She stood there until the sun started to set, reading names, thinking about her grandfather, about Stanley, about all the people she'd never bothered to see, and she made a decision. Not about redemption, not about forgiveness, about who she wanted to be when nobody was watching, because that she was finally beginning to understand was what actually mattered. Réveillez TS, Part 4, Louis, Viet 4900, Sextu 200, Tu liên kết liên mật với các phần truc trong câu chuyện phá hủy thoại, tạo thành một câu chuyện liên mật khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liên mật với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề. Tránh ngắt quãng, đột ngột không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề. Phụ phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả, cảnh tập trung vào hành động cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Việt phần 2 đạt điểm 10-10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh sửa lỗi AI, kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ độ kịch tính, không viết lằn mạn, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong một tin nhắn, không nhảy sang mực document không mô tả cảnh. Có 60-80 retention hooks vào đúng chỗ. Có 3-4 cảnh hành động, khủng hoảng cụ thể, ở phần giữa cứ 10-12 phút. Có một twist lớn sâu sắc. Đan xen mini cliffhanger mạnh. Có retention hooks, giữ chân khán giả. Lưu ý, không mô tả cảnh, và chỉ cần viết nội dung nhé, Part 4, The Lesson in Dignity. Helen called the number on Riker's card the next morning at 8 a.m. sharp. A woman answered on the second ring. Veterans Resource Alliance. This is Carmen. Hi, my name is Helen Morrison. Thomas Riker gave me your number and said you might be hiring. Hold on. The line went silent. Helen could hear muffled voices. Then Carmen came back. Helen Morrison. From the video. Helen's stomach dropped. Yes. Hang on again. More muffled conversation. Then a different voice came on, male older with the kind of authority that suggested military background. Ms. Morrison, this is David Brennan. I run VRA. Tom called me yesterday and said you might reach out. He said you might have a position. I might. But I need to be straight with you first. Half my staff are veterans. The other half are family members of veterans. Everyone here has skin in the game. If I hire you, there will be people who quit. People who can't get past what you did. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't a redemption tour. This is hard work for not enough money helping people who've been failed by everyone including themselves sometimes. It's frustrating and heartbreaking, and there are no viral videos when you succeed, just quiet moments that matter to one person at a time. That's what I want, Helen said. Quiet moments that matter. Brennan was silent for a long moment. Can you start Monday? Yes. 8 a.m. Don't be late. And Ms. Morrison, you get one chance, just one. Don't waste it. He hung up. Helen sat in her studio apartment staring at her phone and realized she was terrified. Not of failing, of succeeding and still not being enough. But she showed up Monday at 7:45 a.m. The Veterans Resource Alliance operated out of a converted warehouse that had seen better decades. The front door stuck. The air conditioning was loud. The carpet was worn to threads in the high traffic areas. Helen had never seen anything more beautiful. Carmen met her at the door. She was maybe 30 with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. You're early. That's good. Come on, I'll show you around before everyone gets here. The warehouse was divided into sections. One area had rows of donated clothing organized by size and season. Another had furniture couches, beds, kitchen tables in various states of repair. A third section was pure logistics boxes of food hygiene supplies, medical equipment. We serve about 300 veterans a month, Carmen explained as they walked. Some are homeless, some are just barely hanging on. Some just need help navigating the VA system. We provide whatever we can. What would I be doing? Inventory management, distribution, coordination, donor relations. Basically making sure stuff gets from people who have it to people who need it. Carmen stopped walking, turned to face Helen directly. But before we go further, I need to tell you something. My husband is a Marine. 2 tours in Afghanistan. He came home with PTSD so bad he couldn't work for 3 years. We lost our house, our savings, almost lost our marriage. And the whole time, people looked at him like he was weak, like he was broken, like he didn't matter. Helen's throat tightened. I'm sorry. I don't want your apology. I want to know if you understand, really understand. Because Tom vouched for you, and Stanley Grant forgave you, but that doesn't mean I trust you. Trust is earned here, every single day. I understand. We'll see. Carmen started walking again. Staff meeting is at 8. Don't talk unless you're asked a direct question. Just listen. The staff meeting was held in a cramped room with mismatched chairs and a whiteboard covered in illegible notes. 12 people filed in, and Helen felt every single one of them look at her and then look away. Brennan stood at the front. Everyone, this is Helen Morrison. She's starting today in logistics. I know some of you have concerns. You're welcome to discuss them with me privately. But while she's here, she's part of the team. Treat her accordingly. A man in the back, older gray beard, VFW cap, raised his hand. Does she know what she's getting into? She's about to find out, Brennan said. Helen, you're with Martinez today. He'll show you the ropes. Martinez turned out to be a compact man in his 40s with steady hands and a quiet voice. He'd served in Iraq. Helen learned later and had more commendations than he ever talked about. Ever done inventory management? He asked as they walked to the warehouse floor. For a gun store. 7 years. This is different. People's lives depend on this. We screw up an order someone doesn't eat. Someone doesn't have a coat when winter comes. Someone doesn't get the medication they need. He handed her a clipboard. Today you're going to count everything in Section C. Every item, every size, every condition. When you're done, you're going to input it into our database. Then you're going to help me load a truck for tomorrow's distribution. Okay. One more thing. You're going to meet people today, veterans who come in for help. Some of them will recognize you, some won't. Either way, you treat them with respect. You listen when they talk. You don't make assumptions. You don't rush them. And you absolutely do not make them feel like they're less than. Clear. Clear. Helen spent the next 4 hours counting donated clothes. Pants, shirts, jackets, shoes. Every item got tagged, measured, assessed for condition. Her back ached, her hands cramped, and she'd never felt more purposeful in her life. At noon, Martinez took her to the front area, where veterans came in for services. Watch and learn, he said. An elderly man shuffled in, thin and unsteady on his feet. He wore a jacket that was too big and shoes held together with duct tape. Carmen greeted him with a warmth that felt genuine. Mr. Peterson, good to see you. How are you doing today? Cold, Mr. Peterson said. Heater broke in my apartment. Landlord says it'll be 2 weeks. 2 weeks is too long. Let's get you a space heater. Helen, can you grab the orange box from Section D? Helen moved fast, found the box, brought it back. Inside was a brand new space heater still in packaging. Carmen handed it to Mr. Peterson. This should help. And Mr. Peterson, I want you to take some extra blankets too, just in case. I can't pay. You don't need to pay. This is what we're here for. Carmen looked at Helen. Can you help Mr. Peterson load this in his car? Helen carried the heater out. Mr. Peterson's car was older than Helen's first apartment, held together with rust and prayer. Thank you, young lady, he said as she put the heater in his trunk. You're welcome, sir. He looked at her more closely. Have we met? Helen's heart hammered. I don't think so. You look familiar. Then his face changed. Oh, you're the woman from the video. The one who was mean to that Korean War veteran. Helen couldn't breathe. Yes, sir. That was me. Mr. Peterson studied her for a long moment. You working here now? Yes, sir. Just started today. Why? Because I want to do better. Be better. He nodded slowly. My son served in Iraq. Came home different, angry all the time. Couldn't hold a job. I tried to help, but I didn't understand. Thought he just needed to toughen up, get over it. His voice cracked. He killed himself 4 years ago. I never got to tell him I was sorry for not understanding. Helen felt tears burning. I'm so sorry. You should be sorry for what you did. But being sorry isn't enough. You have to actually change, actually do the work. He got into his car. I'll be watching to see if you do. He drove away, leaving Helen standing in the parking lot with tears streaming down her face. Martinez appeared beside her. First one's always the hardest.
Bestish.
Does it get easier? No, you just get stronger. He headed back inside. Come on. We've got 40 more boxes to inventory before we can load the truck. The rest of the day passed in a blur of physical work and emotional exhaustion. By the time Helen left at 6 p.m., her body ached and her mind was spinning. But she came back Tuesday, and Wednesday, and every day after that. The work was relentless. The pay was exactly as bad as Brennan had warned. And slowly, painfully, Helen started to understand what she'd been missing her entire life. Purpose. Real purpose. Not profit or success or reputation. Just the simple act of helping someone who needed help. 3 weeks into her new job, Helen was loading donated furniture into a truck when a woman approached. She was maybe 60, well-dressed, with the kind of confidence that suggested she didn't need VRA's services. Excuse me, are you Helen Morrison? Helen straightened up, bracing herself. Yes. My name is Patricia Grant. I'm Stanley's wife. The world tilted sideways. I didn't know, Helen stammered. I mean, no one told me that Stanley was married. We've been married for 59 years. He doesn't talk about me much. Says I'm the only secret he managed to keep from the army. Patricia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I wanted to meet you, to see for myself. See what? If you meant what you said at the memorial, or if you were just performing. Helen set down the chair she'd been carrying. I meant every word. So did Stanley when he forgave you. But I'm not Stanley. I'm the woman who held him while he cried after what you did. I'm the woman who watched him question his worth for the first time in 60 years. I'm the woman who had to convince him he wasn't a burden, wasn't worthless, wasn't invisible. Mrs. Grant, you broke something in him that day. Stanley forgave you because that's who he is. But I need to know if you understand what you actually broke. Helen's voice came out as a whisper. His dignity. No. He got his dignity back the moment that Colonel saluted him. What you broke was his sense of safety. His belief that the world was a place where people saw him as human. Patricia's voice was steady, but her eyes were fierce. He's 84 years old. He doesn't have time to rebuild that belief. So I need to know, are you the kind of person who will help rebuild it? Or are you the kind who will break something else? I'm trying to be the first kind. Trying isn't enough, you have to be. Every single day, with every single person. Not because cameras are watching, but because it's right. I know. Patricia studied her for a long moment. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. Stanley wanted me to give you this. I told him he was being too kind. He told me grace isn't about being kind. It's about being human. She handed Helen the envelope and walked away without another word. Helen's hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter on paper so thin it was almost translucent. Dear Ms. Morrison, it read in careful, shaky handwriting. Thank you for your apology at the memorial. It took courage to stand up in front of everyone and admit fault. I want you to know that I meant it when I forgave you. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It just makes them bearable. I hope you find peace in your new work. I hope you find purpose in helping others. And I hope you never forget that every person you meet, young or old, rich or poor, decorated or unknown, carries a story that deserves respect. That's the lesson I learned in Korea. I hope it's the lesson you learn now. With respect, Stanley Grant. Helen read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her wallet next to the business card Riker had given her. She went back to loading furniture. That night, Helen got a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Is this Helen Morrison? Yes. This is Linda Morehouse from Channel 7. We did the interview with you a few weeks ago. I wanted to let you know we're doing a follow-up piece. Where are you now, what you're doing? Would you be willing to talk? Helen's first instinct was to say no, to refuse, to keep her head down and avoid more cameras. But then she thought about Mr. Peterson, about Patricia Grant, about all the veterans who walked into VRA every day needing help and getting judgment instead. I'll do it, Helen said, but on one condition. What's that? You don't make it about me. You make it about the work, about VRA, about the veterans who need help. I'll talk about what I did wrong, but only as context. The story isn't my redemption. The story is why places like this matter. Linda was quiet for a moment. That's actually a much better story. I'll send a crew tomorrow. The interview aired 3 days later. Helen watched it at home alone, barely recognizing herself on screen. The woman talking looked tired, older, humbler. She talked about consequences and learning and the daily work of being better. She talked about veterans who'd lost everything and were trying to rebuild. She talked about VRA's funding struggles, their need for donations, their desperate search for volunteers. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't claim to be redeemed. She just told the truth. The segment ended with footage of Helen loading boxes, talking with veterans, doing unglamorous work that would never go viral. The final shot was Linda's voiceover. Helen Morrison destroyed her own life with cruelty. Now she's rebuilding it with service. Whether that's enough is not for us to decide, but it's a start. Helen's phone started ringing before the segment even finished. The first call was from her mother. I'm proud of you, baby, Helen cried. The second call was from David Brennan. We just got 17 calls from people wanting to volunteer, and 3 substantial donation pledges. Whatever you did, it's working. The third call was from a number Helen didn't recognize. Ms. Morrison, this is Robert Grant, Stanley's son. I just watched your interview. Helen braced herself. I understand if you're angry that I'm not angry. I'm calling to say thank you. For what? For not making it about yourself. My father watched it too. He said you finally get it. That's high praise from him. Helen couldn't speak around the lump in her throat. There's something else, Robert continued. My father is having a birthday next month. He'll be 85. We're having a small party, just family and close friends. He asked me to invite you. What? He wants you there. Says it would mean something. I don't pretend to understand his capacity for grace, but I've learned not to question it. Robert paused. You don't have to come. God knows you don't owe us anything. But the invitation is genuine. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. That's enough. He gave her the date and time and hung up. Helen sat in her apartment, staring at her phone, trying to process the impossible kindness of a man who had every reason to hate her. She thought about her grandfather, about all the things she'd never said to him, all the respect she'd never shown. She couldn't change the past, but maybe she could honor it. Helen called Robert back. I'll be there, and thank you for giving me the chance. 3 weeks later, Helen stood outside a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, holding a carefully wrapped present and wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. She'd agonized over the gift. What do you give a man like Stanley Grant? What could possibly be appropriate? Finally, she'd settled on a donation in his name to the Korean War Veterans Memorial Foundation. Not flashy, not personal, just meaningful. She rang the doorbell. Patricia Grant answered. She looked at Helen without smiling. You came. I was invited. By Stanley, not by me. But Patricia stepped aside. Come in. The house was warm, filled with voices and laughter. Family Helen realized. Children and grandchildren, and probably great-grandchildren, all gathered to celebrate a man who'd given them everything. Stanley sat in an armchair by the fireplace, surrounded by people who loved him. He looked up when Helen entered, and his face broke into a genuine smile. "Miss Morrison, you made it." "Happy birthday, Mr. Grant." Helen held out the present. "This is for you." Stanley opened it carefully, reading the donation certificate. His eyes got wet. "This is very generous, thank you. It's not nearly enough, but it's something." "It's everything," Stanley said quietly, "because it means you understand. That's all I ever wanted." Someone called from the kitchen that cake was ready. The room started to empty as people migrated toward food. Stanley gestured to the chair beside him. "Sit with me for a minute." Helen sat. They didn't speak for a long moment, just sat together, an old man and the woman who'd humiliated him in a house full of love and second chances. "You're doing good work at VRA," Stanley said finally. "I've been hearing things. Good things. I'm trying. That's all any of us can do. Try. Fail sometimes. Try again." He looked at her with those eyes that had seen everything. "I want to tell you something. That day in your store, I wasn't trying to buy a rifle for myself. I was buying it for the museum, yes, but I was also proving something." "What?" "That I still mattered, that I was still capable, that age hadn't made me invisible." His voice dropped. "And when you refused me, when you mocked me, it confirmed my worst fear, that I'd become nothing, just another old man taking up space." "Mr. Grant, let me finish. I went home that day ready to give up. Not on life, but on mattering, on being seen. But then the colonel came, and the video went viral, and suddenly people remembered, not just that I existed, but that I'd done something that mattered." He smiled sadly. "You gave me that, not intentionally, but you did. You reminded the world that veterans are still here, still alive, still deserving respect." Helen's tears fell freely now. "I don't deserve credit for that." "No, but you get it anyway, because that's how grace works. It shows up where it's least deserved and most needed." Stanley reached over and patted her hand. "You're going to be okay, Miss Morrison. You're already becoming okay. I can see it. I don't feel okay. You will. Give it time. Give it work. Give it grace." He stood up slowly. "Now come on. Let's go have some cake before my grandchildren eat it all." Helen followed him into the kitchen where 3 generations of Grants were laughing and talking and celebrating a man who'd survived everything and come out kind. And for the first time since that day in Aegis Armory, Helen felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not that she'd be forgiven by everyone, not that her reputation would be restored, not that life would go back to normal, but hope that she could become someone worth respecting. Someone who saw people instead of assumptions. Someone who chose grace over judgment. Someone who finally understood that dignity isn't about what you've accomplished. It's about how you treat people who can't do anything for you. And Helen Morrison, standing in Stanley Grant's kitchen, eating birthday cake with a family that had every reason to hate her, finally understood what that meant.
Resayetias Part 5 lưu ý viết 49/100, 6200 từ liên kết liên mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện và hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh tập trung vào hành động cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Viết phần 2, đạt điểm 10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh sửa lỗi AI. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3 giữ độ kịch tính không viết lan man. Kết thúc, dùng câu khẳng định, manh đề khép lại câu chuyện rõ ràng, trọn vẹn. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn, không nhảy sang mực document không mô tả cảnh. Timestamps cứ there, có 60-80 retention hooks vào đúng chỗ. Có 3-4 cảnh hành động khủng hoảng cụ thể ở phần giữa cứ 10-12 phút, có một twist lớn sâu sắc, đan xen mini cliffhanger mạnh. Có retention hooks giữ chân khán giả. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh và chỉ cần viết nội dung nhé. Part 9. Redemption in Coffee. 6 months passed like water through cupped hands. Helen's life had become something she'd never imagined. She woke at 5:30 every morning, made instant coffee in her studio apartment, and arrived at VRA by 7 a.m. She stayed until dark most days, sometimes later. The work was endless, and the pay barely covered rent, but something had shifted inside her that money couldn't touch. She'd learned the names of every veteran who walked through VRA's doors. Learned their stories not because she asked, but because they trusted her enough to share. Mr. Peterson came in every Tuesday for his prescriptions. James Park needed help filing disability claims. A younger vet named Marcus, only 26 but already broken by Afghanistan, needed someone to just listen without judgment. Helen listened. She'd gotten good at listening, at being present, at seeing people instead of problems. But the internet never forgot, and neither did most of the world. Her face was still the first result when you searched for disrespectful gun store owner. The video still had 15 million views. Comments still rolled in daily, most of them variations on "she deserves everything she got" and "once cruel, always cruel." Helen had stopped reading them after the first month. Carmen had told her something important. You can't control what people think about who you were. You can only control who you are right now. Right now, Helen was someone different, but she was about to discover that being different wasn't the same as being forgiven by everyone. It started with an email that landed in her inbox on a cold November morning. Miss Morrison, my name is Daniel Kraus. I'm a producer for 60 Minutes. We're doing a segment on public shaming and internet justice, and your story came up repeatedly in our research. We'd like to interview you. Please call at your earliest convenience. Helen stared at the email for 10 minutes before showing it to Brennan. He read it twice. What do you want to do? I don't know. Part of me wants to hide forever. Part of me thinks maybe I should tell people what I've learned. What have you learned? Helen thought about that. That shame doesn't teach anything, but consequence does. Shame just crushes you. Consequence forces you to rebuild. That's worth saying. But Helen, you need to understand, if you do this, you're putting yourself back in the spotlight. People will have opinions. Some won't be kind. They're already not kind. Fair point. Brennan handed back her phone. Call him, but do it for the right reasons, not to rehabilitate your image. Do it because the message matters. Helen called Daniel Kraus that afternoon. The interview was scheduled for 3 weeks later. They'd film at VRA showing Helen at work, then do a sit-down interview about everything that had happened. We want honest, Daniel explained on their pre-interview call. We're not interested in puff pieces or redemption narratives that feel manufactured. We want real. Can you give us real? Real is all I have left, Helen said. The production crew arrived on a Tuesday in early December. They were professional, efficient, and clearly skeptical. Helen could see it in their faces. They'd interviewed hundreds of people claiming to have changed, learned, grown. They'd heard every version of "I'm sorry" that existed. They hadn't heard Helen's yet. Daniel Kraus was younger than Helen expected, maybe 40, with the kind of sharp intelligence that missed nothing. He watched Helen work for 2 hours before saying a word to her. Watched her help an elderly veteran named George find a winter coat that fit. Watched her patiently explain VA paperwork to a confused young Marine. Watched her carry boxes, organize donations, treat every person who walked through the door like they mattered. Finally, he approached. You do this every day. Yes. Why? Because people need help, and I can help. It's that simple. Is it? Or are you trying to prove something? Helen set down the clipboard she'd been holding. At first, maybe. At first, it was about proving I'd changed. But you can't fake this work. You can't pretend to care day after day when you're exhausted and underpaid and people still hate you. Eventually, you either actually care or you quit. And you care? I care. Daniel nodded slowly. Let's do the interview. They set up in a small office. Helen sat across from Daniel, a camera pointed at her face, nowhere to hide. Let's start with the video, Daniel said. When you first saw it go viral, what did you think? That it was unfair.
that I'd been taken out of context, that people didn't understand I was just trying to be responsible. Helen paused. I was wrong about all of that. When did you realize you were wrong? When Stanley Grant's son called me. When he told me his father had cried, had questioned his worth. An 84-year-old war hero called his son, asking if he was embarrassed by him. Helen's voice cracked. That's when I understood what I'd actually done. I hadn't just refused service. I'd stolen someone's dignity. Do you think you deserved what happened to you? Losing your business, your reputation, everything. Helen thought about that carefully. I don't know if anyone deserves to lose everything, but I understand why it happened. Actions have consequences. I was cruel, and cruelty gets punished. Maybe not always, maybe not fairly, but in my case it did. Some people would say the punishment was disproportionate, that you made one mistake and paid with your entire life. Some people would be right, but here's what I've learned: fair doesn't matter. What matters is what you do after. Do you hide? Do you blame everyone else? Or do you actually change? Helen looked directly at the camera. I'm trying to change, every single day. Not because I think it'll make people forgive me, but because it's right. Daniel leaned forward. Let me ask you something difficult. If you could go back to that day knowing everything you know now, what would you do differently? Everything. I would see Stanley Grant walk through that door and I would treat him with respect, not because of his medals or his service, but because he was a human being asking for help. I would really see him instead of making assumptions based on age or appearance or my own prejudices. Do you think you would have treated him differently if he'd been younger, better dressed? The question hit like a fist. Helen wanted to say no, wanted to claim she would have been respectful regardless. But this was about truth. Probably, she admitted. And that's the ugliest part. I had a hierarchy in my head about who deserved my time and respect. Young people, people with money, people who looked a certain way, they got my best. Everyone else got whatever was left. That's who I was. That's what I'm trying not to be anymore. Daniel nodded. We spoke with Stanley Grant for this piece. He says he's forgiven you completely. How does that make you feel? Helen's eyes filled with tears. Unworthy, grateful, confused. How do you accept forgiveness from someone you hurt so deeply? How do you live with that grace? Have you figured it out? No, but I'm trying to earn it anyway. Not by asking for it, but by being better. By helping people the way I should have helped him. The interview lasted 2 hours. By the end, Helen was exhausted, wrung out, but also lighter somehow. Like confessing everything, the ugliness, the shame, the desperate hope that she could become someone different, had released something she'd been carrying. Daniel turned off the camera. That was good, real. Thank you. When does it air? 3 weeks, just before Christmas. He packed up his equipment. Fair warning, not everyone is going to like what you said. Some people will think you're still making excuses. Some will think you don't deserve a platform. But some maybe will hear what you're actually saying. What am I actually saying? Daniel smiled slightly. That people can change if they do the work. That's a message worth hearing. But Helen was about to discover that not everyone wanted to hear it. The segment aired on December 18th. Helen watched it at home alone, barely recognizing the woman on screen who talked about shame and consequence and the daily work of becoming better. Within an hour, her phone exploded. Some messages were supportive. Thank you for being honest. Your courage is inspiring. I made mistakes too. This gives me hope. But others were vicious. You don't deserve redemption. Once a bigot, always a bigot. Stop trying to profit from your cruelty. The worst came from a username she didn't recognize. Your grandfather would be ashamed of you. I served with him in Vietnam. He was a good man. You're nothing like him. Helen stared at that message until her vision blurred. Was it true? Would her grandfather be ashamed, or would he understand that people stumble, fall, and sometimes, if they're lucky and willing to work, get back up? She'd never know. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Ms. Morrison. This is Patricia Grant. Helen's heart stopped. Mrs. Grant. I watched your interview. Stanley and I both did. I hope I didn't. I wasn't trying to. You were honest. That's what Stanley said. He said you told the truth even when it made you look bad. He respects that. Patricia paused. I'm still not sure about you, but I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. Stanley says that's what grace requires. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me. Thank me by continuing to do the work, by being better tomorrow than you were today. That's all any of us can do. Patricia hung up. Helen sat in her apartment phone in her lap and cried. Not from shame this time, from relief. From the exhausting, overwhelming grace of people who had every right to hate her and chose not to. But the story wasn't over yet. 2 days before Christmas, Helen was at VRA helping set up for their holiday dinner, a tradition where they fed anyone who needed a meal, veterans and civilians alike, when a young woman walked in. She couldn't have been more than 25. She looked nervous, angry, determined. Are you Helen Morrison? Helen straightened up. Yes. My name is Sarah Bennett. My father served in Desert Storm. He died 3 years ago. Suicide. Her voice shook. He tried to get help from the VA. They made him wait 6 months for an appointment. When he finally got in, they treated him like he was wasting their time. Like he was just another broken soldier looking for attention. Helen's throat tightened. I'm so sorry. You should be. Because you're part of the problem. You and everyone like you who looks at veterans and sees problems instead of people. Who decides who deserves respect based on how convenient they are. You're right. Sarah blinked. What? You're right, I was part of the problem. I looked at Stanley Grant and saw an inconvenient old man instead of a human being who deserved respect. I can't change what I did. I can't bring your father back, but I can do better now. Doing better now doesn't help my father. He's dead. I know, and I'm sorry, truly sorry. But Sarah, if you're here, if you tracked me down and came all this way, it's not just to yell at me. What do you need? Sarah's anger cracked. I need to know it matters. That my father's death meant something. That someone somewhere learned something. It matters. He matters. And I did learn. I learned that every person who walks through a door, anywhere, deserves to be seen. Really seen. Your father deserved that. Stanley Grant deserved that. You deserve that right now. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I don't know why I came here. Because you need to know someone's paying attention, someone cares, someone is trying to do better. Helen gestured around VRA. This place exists because people like your father needed help and didn't get it. We're trying to change that, one person at a time. It's not enough. It'll never be enough, but it's something. Can I help? The question caught Helen off guard. What? Can I help here? At VRA? I don't know what I'm doing, but I want to do something. For my dad. For all of them. Helen looked at this young woman carrying her father's death, like a weight she'd never be able to put down, and saw herself 6 months ago. Broken. Desperate. Looking for purpose in the wreckage. Yes, Helen said. You can help. We need volunteers, especially for tomorrow's dinner. Can you be here at 7 a.m.? I'll be here. Sarah left. Carmen walked over, having heard the entire conversation. That was good, Carmen said quietly. That was really good. She needs purpose as much as I did. We all need purpose. That's what this place is. Purpose for people who lost theirs. The next day, Christmas Eve, VRA served 417 people. Helen worked the food line alongside Sarah Martinez Carmen and a dozen volunteers. They served turkey and stuffing and vegetables to veterans who had nowhere else to go, to families struggling to make ends meet, to anyone who walked through the door hungry. Stanley Grant came with Patricia and Robert. Helen saw them walk in and her heart jumped. Mr. Grant, you didn't have to. We come every year, Stanley said simply. It's tradition. We eat, we talk with people, we remember why this matters. They went through the line like everyone else. Helen served Stanley his plate personally, hands shaking slightly. Thank you, Ms. Morrison, Stanley said. Thank you for coming. He smiled. Where else would I be? After dinner, after most people had left, after the volunteers had cleaned up and the kitchen was quiet, Stanley found Helen sitting alone in the corner. You look tired, he said. I am tired, but it's good tired, the kind that comes from doing something that matters. I watched your interview, the one on 60 Minutes. Helen's stomach clenched. What did you think? I think you understand now. Really understand. That's all I ever wanted. He sat down carefully in the chair beside her. Can I tell you something? Of course. When I came home from Korea, people didn't want to hear about it. Didn't want to know what happened over there. It was an uncomfortable war, a confusing war, and we made people uncomfortable just by existing. So we learned to be quiet, to not take up space, to be grateful anyone acknowledged us at all. His voice got softer, and then I got old. And being old made me even more invisible. And that day in your store when you looked at me like I was nothing, it confirmed what I'd feared my whole life, that I'd vanished, that I didn't matter anymore. Mr. Grant. Let me finish. What you did hurt. But what happened after the colonel saluting me, the video going viral, people remembering it, gave me something I'd lost. It made me visible again. Not just as a veteran, but as a person who mattered. So in a strange way, your cruelty led to that reminder. I'm not saying you did a good thing, but good came from it anyway. I don't deserve credit for that. No. But you deserve credit for what you're doing now, for showing up, for doing the work, for helping people like Sarah find purpose. He patted her hand. My son told me you were at my birthday party, that you brought a donation to the memorial fund. It seemed appropriate. It was more than appropriate. It was thoughtful. It was exactly right. Stanley stood slowly. I'm 85 now. I don't have much time left. But I want you to know something before I go. You made a terrible mistake. But you're becoming a good person. Those two things can both be true. Helen couldn't speak around the tears. Stanley walked away, Patricia taking his arm, Robert following behind. A family united by love and service and grace that extended even to people who didn't deserve it. Helen sat alone for a long time after they left, thinking about redemption and forgiveness and the impossible kindness of people who'd seen the worst of humanity and still chose to believe in the best. The next morning, Christmas Day, Helen woke up alone in her studio apartment. No tree, no decorations, no family gathering. But she didn't feel alone. She made coffee, checked her phone, and saw a text from an unknown number. This is Sarah. Thank you for yesterday. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for giving me a place to matter. Merry Christmas. Helen texted back. Thank you for giving me a chance. Merry Christmas. Then another text, this one from Martinez. Boss wants to know if you can work tomorrow. Big donation came and needs sorting. Helen smiled. I'll be there. She spent Christmas Day at her mother's house. They ate ham and watched old movies and didn't talk about the video or the scandal or anything heavy. Just sat together like mothers and daughters should, making up for lost time. I'm proud of you, her mother said as Helen was leaving. For what? For not giving up, for doing the work, for becoming someone your grandfather would recognize. Helen hugged her mother tight and drove back to her apartment, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the peace of having everything figured out. Not the peace of being forgiven by everyone. Just the peace of knowing she was trying. Really trying. Every single day. 3 months later in March, Helen got another call that would change everything. Ms. Morrison, this is Margaret Chen. I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition? VRA does good work, important work, but they need funding. Corporate sponsors, someone who can interface with donors and media while keeping the mission pure. Margaret paused. They need a director of development. David Brennan recommended you. No, he did. He said you understand consequence, you understand grace, and you understand how to translate personal transformation into organizational mission. That's a rare combination. I don't know if I'm qualified. 6 months ago you weren't. Today you are. The question is whether you're brave enough to accept. Helen thought about Stanley Grant walking into that gun store, asking for respect, getting cruelty. She thought about him forgiving her anyway. She thought about every veteran who'd walked into VRA needing help and trusting her to provide it. "I'm brave enough," Helen said. "When do I start?" "Immediately. We'll announce it at next month's fundraising gala. You'll speak. Tell your story. Show people why this work matters." Helen hung up and sat in her apartment staring at her hands, these hands that had once pushed away a war hero and now helped feed 400 people on Christmas Eve. The same hands, but different purpose. That's what change looked like. Not dramatic transformation, just daily choice to be better than yesterday. The fundraising gala in April was held at a hotel Helen couldn't have afforded to stay in when she owned Aegis Armory. She wore a dress her mother had helped her pick out, simple and professional, and stood backstage listening to Margaret Chen introduce her. Our next speaker understands failure, understands consequence, and most importantly understands that redemption isn't a destination. It's a daily practice. Please welcome Helen Morrison, VRA's new Director of Development. Helen walked onto the stage. 500 people looked at her. Some recognized her, some didn't. All were waiting to hear what she had to say. "6 months ago, I was the most hated person on the internet," Helen began. "I had humiliated a war hero, lost my business, and destroyed my reputation. I thought my life was over. But a man named Stanley Grant taught me something. He taught me that life isn't over when you fail. It's over when you stop trying to do better." She talked for 15 minutes about shame and consequence and the difference between the two, about the daily work of becoming someone worth respecting, about VRA and the veterans who walked through their doors every day needing help, not judgment. "I can't undo what I did," she concluded. "I can't give Stanley Grant back the dignity I stole or erase the pain I caused. But I can spend every day trying to be better, helping people who need help, seeing people instead of assumptions, choosing grace over judgment. That's not redemption. That's just being human. And if I can do it after everything I've done, anyone can." The applause started slow, then built. Helen walked off stage into Margaret Chen's approving nod and David Brennan's proud smile. But the person whose opinion mattered most was sitting in the front row. Stanley Grant, 85 years old and frail, but still present, still witnessing, still offering grace to people who didn't deserve it. He caught Helen's eye and nodded once. That nod meant everything. After the gala, after the donors had pledged $200,000 and the media had gotten their sound bites and the crowd had dispersed, Helen found herself alone in the hotel lobby. She was about to call a car when Stanley appeared, Patricia supporting him on one side, Robert on the other. "Mr. Grant, you shouldn't have stayed so late. I wanted to hear you speak, wanted to see for myself." He smiled. "You did good, Miss Morrison. You told the truth. That takes courage. I learned from the best." "No, you learned from your mistakes. That's harder." Stanley reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. "I want you to have this." He handed her a coin, old worn with Korean writing on one side. "What is it?" "A coin I carried through Chosin Reservoir. Kept it in my pocket through the whole war. Thought it was lucky, though I don't believe in luck anymore. I believe in people choosing to be better. That's what this represents. Choice. I can't accept this. You have to. Because someday, years from now, you're going to meet someone who makes a terrible mistake. Someone who's where you were 6 months ago. And you're going to give them this coin and tell them about choice, about grace, about second chances that have to be earned through daily work." Stanley closed Helen's fingers around the coin. "Promise me you'll pass it forward." "I promise." "Good." Stanley nodded to Patricia. "We should go. Past my bedtime." They walked away slowly, this family that had given Helen more than she could ever repay. Helen stood in the empty lobby holding a coin that had survived a war and understood finally what redemption actually meant. It meant showing up. Every day, doing the work, being better. Not for applause or forgiveness or redemption itself, but because people needed help, and she could help. It meant carrying forward the grace she'd been given even when she didn't deserve it, especially when she didn't deserve it. It meant understanding that dignity isn't about medals or achievements or reputation. It's about seeing people, really seeing them, and treating them like they matter. Because everyone matters. The bag boy, the janitor, the old man at the counter, the veteran asking for help, the young woman grieving her father, the stranger whose story you'll never know. Everyone. Helen walked out of the hotel into the spring night clutching Stanley Grant's lucky coin and knew with absolute certainty that she would spend the rest of her life proving he'd been right to believe in her. Not because she owed him, but because he'd shown her what she could become. And becoming that person, someone who chose grace over judgment, service over success, humanity over convenience, was the only life worth living. The video would never disappear. Her name would always pull up that moment of cruelty. But it would also pull up everything that came after. The apology, the work, the change, the choice to be better. And someday, maybe when someone made a terrible mistake and thought their life was over, they'd find Helen's story and understand what Stanley Grant had taught her, that redemption isn't about erasing your past, it's about not letting your past erase your future. That grace isn't something you earn, it's something you accept, and then spend your whole life trying to deserve. And that the quiet, invisible people we pass every day, the elderly, the struggling, the forgotten, carry stories that would break us if we knew them, and strength that would humble us if we recognized it. All they're asking for is what Stanley Grant asked for that August afternoon in a gun store that no longer exists. Not special treatment, not praise, not even acknowledgement, just basic human dignity. And Helen Morrison, who'd once denied that to a hero, would spend the rest of her life making sure no one else ever had to ask twice.